Hi everybody. This week's literature anthology selection is Bud, Not Buddy by Christopher Paul Curtis, illustrated by Floyd Cooper. Fun fact about this story is this was written by the same author who wrote The Watsons Go to Birmingham. So one of the things I want to point out before we get started in our discussion and comparing and contrasting characters is this story begins with a portion of it being written in italics, which you probably notice all the words are slanted. That's when you write or type something in italics. This tells us that the story of Bud Not Buddy is actually from a larger story, and so this is a summary of what has happened in this story before we get to the part that we're at when our story begins. And so we learn a lot in this first excerpt of the story. Some things that I hope you pulled from this was that one, this story takes place during the Great Depression. We learn right away that Bud had been shuttling, so he'd been kind of moving between orphanages and foster homes. He doesn't have a lot, but he does carry around a set of rules. Bud Caldwell's rules and things for having a funner life. So this is everything he's learned so far about surviving. And he has a suitcase that he carries around with his most treasured possessions, photos, a blanket, some special stones, and flyers advertising for a famous band. And this last item, this flyer, we quickly learn that this is a flyer for a band led by Herman E. Calloway, who Bud believes is his father. And so Bud is on his way to track down Calloway, and he does indeed find Calloway, who's not, necessarily welcoming Bud with open arms. Calloway's definitely a little bit skeptical of who Bud says he is, but we also get to meet some great characters that end up really changing Bud's life for the better, and those characters are going to help him adapt to his new life and his new home at Grand Calloway Station. But I really want to talk about in this first part is, what is Bud like when we first meet him? Because this is a character that definitely changes from the beginning of the story to the end. And there are some specific events that occur that help with this change. There's some things that happen that help him adapt to his new home. And so I have my graphic organizer here, and you definitely, in your language arts notes, could use a graphic organizer just like this. You just have to draw some circles. But the first kind of thing I want to do is I want to look at this event of Bud tracks down Calloway and meets the band. And this particular graphic organizer is really going to be about Bud and what Bud is like at the beginning of the story. So if you remember in this first part, when Bud tells the band members about what he's been going through, it says that he is crying, that he's exhausted, right? It says he breaks down and cries out of exhaustion and relief. And from there, he's invited to spend the night at Grand Calloway Station. So Bud at the beginning of the story is exhausted. He's tired. He's exhausted, and we know that that means tired. But he's relieved, right? It says he finds relief. He's relieved. And again, this is more so he's relieved that he's found who he's been looking for. Okay? Relieved. I don't know, maybe he's relieved to just be able to tell a story. It could kind of be either of those. Relieved to share his story. Or it could be, or find Calloway. Okay, so when we continue, so here we have Bud tracks down Calloway and meets the band. He's exhausted, tired, but he's also relieved. And that could be he's relieved to share a story. He's relieved that he finally found Calloway. Okay, so as we keep going, and you can always pause the video at that point if you are taking notes. So we know that, in the beginning of this story, he spends the night there. And we know that when he wakes up that next morning, he's kind of a little unsure. He overhears a conversation of Miss Thomas speaking with Mr. Calloway, kind of telling Mr. Calloway, like, hey, we made this decision as a group that Bud was going to stay with us. She uses the expression, so that's how the cookie's going to crumble. That's an idiom for, kind of meaning that's how things are going to go, right? So idioms are one thing that are used a lot in this story. They were used a lot in the first story as well. You have to use context clues to figure out what those sayings mean. So, Miss Thomas has a lot of sympathy for Bud, and so she definitely decides, Bud's going to stay there with them, and Calloway can go ahead and figure out, what the story is. But as of right now, they're not sending Bud back to an orphanage or a foster home. But Bud hears this, and Bud hears kind of, Calloway's gruff manner of speaking, and so he's a little unsure about what's going to happen. And he even says it, I was glad I didn't take anything out of my suitcase because it looks like I might be making a break for the street again. And so, if we're thinking about he's not unpacking his suitcase, making a break for the street probably has something to do with leave quickly. Okay, we're using that context clue. So here he is, this beginning of the story, he's eavesdropping, he's overhearing. All of a sudden, he gets a little unsure. Last night he felt relieved. Now he's a little unsure. He might have to leave again. But as he continues to listen, he hears the people say that, they want him to stay. And he hears more than one person say this, which definitely, indicates to him like, okay, this could work out. So he does something. He goes back upstairs, uses the bathroom, and when he starts to walk down the stairs, he makes as much noise as possible. He does that because he wants them to know that he wants them to know that he is coming down the stairs, so that way they can stop talking about him, right? Because he doesn't want to make them feel uncomfortable. And that really shows, Bud really wants to be able to stay there. Okay? He cares about what other people think. He really wants, he wants to be able to stay there. So we're going to add some things. So Bud tracks down Calloway and meets the band. This is the night. This is the next morning. So at the beginning of the story, he's a little unsure if he will have to leave. We also know that Bud at the beginning of the story he's thoughtful and he's caring. Okay, so this is Bud at the beginning of the story. And some of these things are going to change. I hope you're already making predictions, or you were making predictions when you listened, but a lot of these things changed. These three especially, or being exhausted and tired, a little unsure, those definitely changed. Bud didn't feel this way throughout the entire story. Go that way, please. Go that way, please. Thank you. Bud didn't feel that way throughout the entire story. He definitely